Welcome to the Heart and Life Podcast, a podcast dedicated to encouraging, equipping, and edifying the people called Methodist in North Alabama and across the globe. Hello again, everyone, and welcome. My name is Brandon Rogers, and I'm the host of the Heart and Life Podcast, where we're seeking to offer encouragement, equipping, and education for the people called Methodist here in North Alabama and around the globe. Friends, as many of you are aware, the North Alabama Conference of the Global Methodist Church has formed a ministry partnership with our Global Methodist brothers and sisters in Nigeria. No doubt you all have seen many things about the happenings in Nigeria, and some of you were even able to recently hear from Bishop Otta as he and his wife traveled around some of our annual conferences. Many of you also probably know of Bishop Jones's recent visit there and the good work of the Global Methodist Church that's taking place there in Nigeria. Much is happening in that region of the world, some that brings us great joy and other things that bring us deep lament. Being so far away from that can make it difficult for us to fully grasp all that's happening there, which is why I'm so excited for today's conversation. I am pleased to welcome to the Heart and Life podcast today the Reverend Robert Sparkman, who is an elder in the Global Methodist Church, has over 40 years of ministry experience, who has some deep connections with the church in Nigeria, and also recently was in Nigeria on a trip that coincided with Bishop Jones's visit. So, Robert, it is so good to have you on. Welcome to the Heart and Life podcast.
I am delighted to be here. Enjoyed talking about the Nigerian mission and enjoying getting to know you.
Absolutely, absolutely. Well, as we were talking about beforehand, you have a tremendous life in ministry, and that's kind of where I want to start. I want to spend as much time as we can talking about Nigeria, but the way that I like to start these podcasts is just to get to know and let our listeners get to know our guest a little bit. So, Robert, if you could just maybe tell us a little bit about yourself, your family, your faith journey, your ministry experience, that sort of thing.
Well, real quickly, because I'm so excited about Nigeria, I want to get there, but I grew up in Aliceville in the Black Belt, went to Auburn and then Emory, and came out and right into the ministry and actually in student ministry. So I served 44 years in the United Methodist Church, married Debbie, had 3 children, served all over North Alabama, about 10 full-time appointments. And, it's been a great life. And I'm retired now in Aniana. My wife and I have a beautiful home here, and we're just enjoying retirement.
Fantastic. That sounds amazing. I'm an Auburn graduate myself, so we have that in common. And
you just lost some listeners there, Brandon.
Yeah, I try to keep that quiet sometimes. Actually, the church where I serve now has a whole lot of Auburn people in it, so I feel a lot more at home than some of the places that.
Yeah, where do you serve, Brandon?
Sure. So I serve at Riddle's Chapel, just outside of Athens, up in the very northern part of the state. We've been up here for a little over 3.5 years now. It's a great place. We love being here. Well, Robert, you started to tell me as we began this conversation before we started recording about your connection with Nigeria, and I think maybe that's a great place for us to start. Can you kind of tell us how you got involved with the church there in Nigeria, how you met those folks, and just kind of how all of that came about?
Well, the 2012 General Conference in Tampa, Florida, they seated us with a Nigerian delegation, and we were in a round table so we could get to know parts of the other delegations. And we loved the leadership of the Nigerian delegation. And my friends and I became friends with them, went out to eat lunch, and the head of the delegation was a man named John Wesley. One word, his first name, John Wesley, Johanna. And so it was a very disappointing general conference because I felt like it was manipulated to kill a thing called Plan UMC to restructure the boards and agencies and get more accountability. And it was manipulated. And I'd love to do a podcast with you on that if you'd like for me to sometimes, the dishonesty of that general conference. So at the end, everything we had done was ruled unconstitutional by the Judicial Council, and so disappointing. And in the midst of all that emotion, right at the end, I was talking to my delegation, and I said, we ought to do something with the Nigerians in mission. And they said, go for it, Robert. The lay leader said, go for it. And so I went over to John Wesley and said, John Wesley, what do you need in Nigeria? And he said, we need a comprehensive secondary school in the Central Conference of Nigeria, in his British, African accent. And the Holy Spirit just got hold of me, Brandon, so I couldn't talk. It was the most, one of the strongest times where the Holy Spirit just came into me, and I really was, they call it verklempt. I couldn't speak. And John Wesley was looking at me, and then he repeated himself. He thought I hadn't understood him, and said, we need a comprehensive secondary school in the Central Conference of Nigeria. He said, we have no training for the skills. We have academic schools that are not good, but nothing to train people in the real skills that they need. And so I finally choked out, we'll see what we can do. And that night I went back and I was rooming with a couple of people, and they said, go for it, Robert, let's go. And I didn't know what my next step was, because I didn't know where John Wesley and them were staying. So I got to the airport the next day and saw a friend I'd worked on with fair representation issues in General Conference over about 6 times that I went to General Conference. And his name was Jeff Jernigan from North Georgia. I said, Jeff, don't you work in Nigeria? A man named John Wesley wants me to help him start a comprehensive secondary school. He said, you're going to love working with John Wesley. We're going in August, and you're going with us.
Oh, wow. Wow. Clearly the hand of God was on that meeting. Wow.
Absolutely. God wanted us involved with the Nigerians. And we formed a partnership, had people all over the conference giving money, and they built that little comprehensive secondary school, and had about 125 students. And they asked me to come back in 2019 and do the first graduation ceremony and preach a sermon for the first graduation ceremony. So wow. It's gone on very well, and we went to visit them on this last visit that we were down there. So that's the way that got started, and I would go over every couple of years and get more information, come back and do my little programs and things like that. And we raised about $250,000 for the school over that 12 years, right around in there before disaffiliation.
Outstanding. Robert, how many times do you even know? How many times you have been to Nigeria at this point?
I believe it's 6.
Oh, wow.
For a couple of weeks at each time. It's so hard to get over there. You got to stay a few days, But sure. It's been a real growing thing for me. I did a lot of volunteers in mission, going one place one time, one place another. And I was head of VIM for a while. But to stay there and help that school to grow and really do what it needs to do, and try to be a partner to them rather than just a benefactor, just try to partner with them, and that's what we're trying to do in these partnerships, is be a little different than just sending them money, but sharing expertise, sharing other things that we can with them as we work alongside of them. So we're trying to make it a real partnership rather than a dependent benefactor kind of relationship.
I am so glad that you said that, and I think that is so important. Just, is somebody who is part of the North Alabama Conference and who's looking at the way that things are unfolding with the Global Methodist Church. We don't need to go into places in Africa and tell them how their context should operate. we can learn from them, they can learn from us, and we can have, I think, a real partnership like you were saying, rather than us just dumping money on them or trying to tell them we know better than they do of their own context, because and as many of our listeners will know and have seen in the news, the situation that exists in Nigeria is quite complex, and there are a lot of things going on. And from far away, sitting here in North Alabama, it is easy to misinterpret and misunderstand things. So I wonder, and I don't expect a full dissertation on this by any stretch, but could you just kind of paint maybe with broad brush strokes a picture of kind of what is happening in Nigeria these days?
So they were the only bishop then. John Wesley Yohana, that I was friends with, then became bishop and was bishop there, and there are fractious there. There's a fraction that'll peel off and do this if the tribal connections are not just right. It's still a very tribal society there in northeastern Nigeria. And so it's a very complicated picture. But John Wesley was the bishop, and he did. I thought he did a wonderful job, mostly unifying the church and keeping it unified. But there were still problems there, and he was the only one that would step back from all the money of the United Methodist Church and lead his church out of the African bishops. The rest of them were continued to be paid the big money from the United Methodist Church, because that makes them very wealthy people over there, to be a bishop in the United Methodist Church. And I'm sure some of them felt like the regionalization would, and I'm trying to be charitable here and say, I'm sure some of them felt like the regionalization thing that happened would insulate them enough from the problems in the United Methodist Church in America that would cause them problems in Africa.
Right.
But and I don't want to get everything confused, but John Wesley led the Nigerian church out, and the four conferences of Nigeria voted to leave, and they were recognized by the state, by the government of Nigeria, and a large group, though, in the Central Conference, led by a man who had worked for the General Board of Church and Society and had been educated here in the United States, rebelled against that, and so there was a split in the Nigerian church. And so when Bishop Jones was going to go, Bishop John Wesley Yohana retired, and Bishop John Pena Alta was ordained or consecrated bishop in Panama, in the General Conference in Panama. And he has two conferences, and Bishop Jones, that was here in North Alabama, has the other two conferences, the Central and Northern Conference. So we went over there with Bishop Jones to tour the Southern Conference and one place in the Northeast, and to go to the Central Annual Conference and the North Annual Conference and be there with Bishop Jones as he started his ministry there. And so that was the context of this visit, and the context of the Methodists in Nigeria trying to become independent from the United Methodist Church. Did that answer your question?
I think so. Yes, sir. I think it did. So can you tell us a little bit? About, as it currently stands, North Alabama's connection with Nigeria?
Okay, they asked us. They asked North Alabama to be in partnership with the four conferences of Nigeria, along with North Georgia, and I believe that they did that because we already had the relationship, and we had a lot of people that know about Nigeria, because when I came back from Tampa, I formed a partnership here. There were a lot of people in that partnership, so we already had some connections there. And they asked us to partner with the church in Nigeria, and we are with North Georgia in partnering with them.
Fantastic. And when we talk about partnerships, what are some of the things that we are hoping to do through this partnership?
Well, the thing that we want to do is not just be, the people with the money, and trying to tell them what to do. We want to come alongside them and help them with the expertise that we have, and with suggestions and things like that, but not just be determining what needs to be done there. And that's the temptation when you have money. You're going to say, hey, we'd like this to go here, this to go here, this to go here. And so we have read books about forming third world partnerships, and other things. Helping and Not Hurting is a book that we've been using, and those kinds of things, trying to form a partnership that would bring the strengths of both groups together, and we would really work side by side rather than trying to determine anything for them. And we can't know their situation, and we'll designate some money, and then an emergency comes up with something else. They need to be flexible. So, and there's a lot of things going on right now with legal suits with the United Methodist, and the money that they asked for originally doesn't cover. So there's lots of things going on. It's a very complicated situation, but we're just trying to form a partnership so that the strengths of both groups can enrich the other.
Very good. Very good. And you said this a couple of times. It really is. There are a lot of moving parts. It's a very fluid situation there. And sometimes we hear bits and pieces of things and don't really have the full context to understand what all is going on there. There have been, unfortunately, there has been some violence that has erupted, and I sadly have seen people pointing fingers without really knowing the full story. And while we all, of course, abhor violence, we have to understand that there's, in addition to the conflicts related to the UMC and the GMC, there are also tribal conflicts and contextual conflicts that most of us know absolutely nothing about. Am I saying that correctly?
You are, absolutely. There was some violence there, and it was a family feud that had turned two tribes against each other, but they share a chief. And they had become conflicted about the chieftain election. It was a chief. If I have time, I'll tell you a humorous story about the chief of the Karim Mondi and his gift to me. Remind me at the end of this, because I don't want it to be too long. But
Okay.
and that went back. It kind of rebounded on the Methodist Church because the United Methodist bishop blamed us, and that kind of thing. And it was really a family feud that had been going on for 5 generations there. Mm-hmm. So this most recent violence was while we were there, and I'll be glad to tell you about that if you're ready for that.
Absolutely. Please share.
Okay, so the Central Conference is headquartered in Bambour, which was one of the oldest missionary centers when the Methodist Episcopal Church North came into this part of Nigeria in 1923. And it has a guest house, and it has a seminary called Banyam Theological Seminary, and used to have a secondary school and a little rural health clinic, and a bunch of people live right in that area there. And it is under the control of the Global Methodist Church now. And that's where they scheduled the annual conference session for Bishop Jones to go to. We went to a rally day, first day on, and I'll tell you more about this later, but you asked about the violence, and went to a rally day on Saturday when we got there, and a presentation for Bishop John Wesley Yohana's retirement on Sunday. And then Monday we were supposed to get up and go to Bambour for their first annual conference session. And they said there's a delay with security. And we thought it was a mess up with just getting the security together. But the United Methodists had started making trouble there, boycotting the gates, and trying to, according to our people, agitate so that there was violence, agitate the others enough to where they would fight. And so we didn't go that first day. We sat around and waited all day, and they finally told us, yes, there's trouble there. There's some demonstrations and things of the United Methodists. And it's hard to believe, isn't it? It's just hard to believe. But we were talking to our friends. I mean, it was just so genuine what they were telling us. And so the next morning we got up on Tuesday morning, and we crossed the Benway River on these wooden barges, which is a great story in itself. Wooden ferries, and you put two cars on the top of these wooden ferries, and they've got a little 20 horsepower Mercury motor on the back, outboard motor that's kind of sputtering, and we were all standing there by the cars going across the wide Benway River. And wow. I said, ask Bishop Alta if they had any wildlife there left in the river, because they had hunted most of it away in that area there. And he said, yeah, they had a hippopotamus in this river, and it got too aggressive, so they killed it and ate it. So about 3 years before. But I looked back, and it was sputtering, and I looked back, and there was a little boy standing there with this squeeze thing on the gas line, and when it started sputtering, he would squeeze that little bulb and make more gas go into the 20 horsepower motor. So that's wow. the kind of a system we were there. And then got to the other river, and you had to go up a big slope. You know, there's no concrete piers or anything like that. It was just a muddy, not muddy, but a dirt slope on the other side. Anyway, we're going there, and they said it's still not safe. We're going to go to the school. So they went to the school that the North Alabama Partnership had built, and it's called the Ethel Johnson Comprehensive Secondary School, and had a good experience there. I'd love to tell you more about that. And then they said, we've scheduled the conference to a church this side of Bambour. We're not going to Bambour to avoid trouble. So they were going to the trouble of rescheduling the annual conference to a church to avoid any trouble back in Bambour. Mm-hmm. So they were doing their best to keep us safe, and they were doing their best to avoid trouble. And it's so obvious that if they changed, they were trying to avoid the trouble. Mm-hmm. And so we got to the little church way through some dirt roads, the roughest roads you've ever seen. It's a semi-arid area, and this is the dry season, so just clouds of dust. We had an Army security squad with us, and some police as well. So we were well secured and never felt threatened. But we got there and found that there had been violence in Bambour at the Banyam Theological Seminary, which is where we were going to have the annual conference session. Mm-hmm. And they were so downcast about it because they had left some of their friends and family had stayed there while the rest of them had come to the annual conference session. And the bishop's wife was there, Bishop John Pena Alta, who's also my friend from that time in Tampa, and I've known him for all these years. His wife was still there in the seminary, and they had put her in an interior room to protect her, and 6 people had been cut with machetes and an axe, and wow. One of the pastors had been beaten with sticks. So it was subdued there, but we went on and had the annual conference session in the church, ordained, I think at that one it was 8 elders and 6 deacons. I've kind of got the numbers there, and I've got some I'll be glad to go around to the churches and report on this and tell y'all about our partnership and how it's forming up. But just very moving things where the family was there with people getting ordained, and Bishop Jones doing a wonderful job of bringing the whole thing together, and talking about let's concentrate on the movement of God here in this place. We are going to ordain you for God's work, and it was a very moving annual conference there. Mm-hmm. And so we left there, and instead of going on to the next place, we went back to where we had been staying and rechecked back in for the second night of rechecking back in Jalingo. And we went to the hospital and visited the people that had been brought there from Bambour to the Methodist Hospital, which is a great story in itself. It's a wonderful facility there that is now Global Methodist. and we're supporting it from the apportionments from the North Alabama Conference and North Georgia, while they kind of renew what they're going to be doing there. But we went and prayed for the people that had been cut. One person had been cut with a machete all across his chest, slashed across his chest, and another one had been cut in the head. And we talked to them, and they said, yes, we recognize people that were members of the United Methodist Church. And they named them, and said where they were members in this other church that hadn't disaffiliated and hadn't gone with the Global Methodist Church. So it was just so genuine that that we had been trying to avoid the trouble by changing the annual conference session. And it's just so objectively true that we were trying to avoid any kind of problems, that when the United Methodist bishop, whose name is Andy Emanuel, and I've known him since 2013 or 14, and this is just, I'm just being honest, he's just not an honest person. And he plays a lot of manipulative games, and you can put a lot of names on that, and I don't want to put that on there, but very manipulative. He came out and blamed it on the the Global Methodist. He blamed it on us. And I have a program that says we're going to be at the Banyam Theological Seminary for annual conference on this date and this time. They did not have to be there. The other people did not have to be there. And so there's so many things that prove that it was that the Global Methodists were trying to avoid, and Andy Emanuel was trying to stir up that mess. And so that's the story that you need to hear, Brandon, and that it needs to get out, because Andy Emanuel has the ear of Heather Hahn of United Methodist News, and she believes what he says, and it gets out and goes around the world before you can. But now Bishop Jones has made statements, and he was truthful about it, and that needs to get out as well. So you can go and look for Bishop Jones' statement as well from that situation. So we had personal witness. We knew that we had changed the annual conference session from the published date and time, and had avoided it by the first day to try to avoid problems. And then we interviewed and talked to people and prayed with them that told us what had happened. So that's what happened.
Wow. What a tragedy. But even in the midst of that, God's hand clearly was at work as Bishop Jones was able to ordain a number of people. We, if absolutely nothing else, I'm sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead, Robert.
I told him later. I said, Bishop Jones, you were masterful in this, and I said I felt like we were in an ordination service. I felt like we were in First Methodist Church of wherever that we would hold the ordination service, or Trinity Methodist, and I felt the presence of God, and it was a holy experience. And he did a wonderful job bringing things together for that to be an ordination service in that small country church out in nowhere, where we were trying to avoid the problems. And it was a great experience. It was not a bad experience at all to see him, that servant of God, bringing all things together for that. And the family looking so happy around the people as they were being ordained. It was just a very moving experience.
Amen to that. It should hopefully, hearing your story and the difficulties of even holding an annual conference, boy, it should open our eyes to just how easy we have it comparatively in our own context here in North Alabama. We certainly don't have to worry about any sort of physical violence. We may complain because it's too cool in the auditorium, but as compared to that, I think we're doing all right.
You brought that up. I appreciate you bringing that up, because this is one reason I want to work with the Nigerians, and I want our partnership in North Alabama to be productive and healthy. Is they were attacked by the Boko Haram, which was an ISIS allied radical Muslim movement, and that was centered in Maiduguri, and it was that group that had kidnapped those 200 girls from that school there in Nigeria. Was just right north of where we were, and so they endured that persecution, and then the Fulani tribes began to leave the southern part of the Sahara Desert and come into the Benue River Valley, and they would bring those herds of white humped cattle in there, longhorn cattle, and get into the fields of the Nigerians that had been there for generations, and they survived that, and they would attack the villages and burn the villages, and then now there's violence from the United Methodists, and it's just so disappointing. But let me tell you something: they're growing. They have not lost the what's so important. The church there, that annual conference session where they ordained 10 people and 8 elders and 6, or whatever it was, 10 and 8 or 6, 8 and 6, can't remember what it was. They opened a new church. They weren't closing churches like we were doing, every year, the list of churches. They're opening new churches, and they're growing. And persecution brings growth, Brandon. This is the thing. You look at Acts, the book of Acts, and the stoning of Stephen threw the Christians out into the world, and it said they went out into Samaria and all the surrounding areas, and that's where the Ethiopian was converted out there. You understand what I'm saying? It was because of that dispersion that the church, they were too comfortable in Jerusalem. And so they got out there. And so they've been persecuted every way you can be persecuted, and are growing. And we are comfortable, but some of our churches are growing too. So, okay, I've talked enough about that.
No, that is definitely worth mentioning. The church is growing there in spite of the persecution, and it's important for us to continue to lift up our brothers and sisters over there in prayer as they are literally risking their lives for the sake of the gospel, and we praise God for their faithfulness. You mentioned a couple of things that I'd like to circle back to, and of course I don't want to belabor the point. We recognize there's violence there. I would much rather spend our time celebrating what God is doing there. You mentioned something about a rally day. Would you share a little bit about what that was all about?
The first day was a rally day for the Global Methodist Church, and the women have these huge revivals, and so they had decided to make that a rally day for the Global Methodist Church and honor Bishop Jones, and I started to say presiding elder, but what they call that, the conference superintendent now of North Georgia was there, and they had him on the stage, and it was there were 5,000 ladies all dancing in the African style and singing Christian songs out in the middle of the day in 100-degree heat. On this rally day. I've got pictures of that I can show, and the sounds of that where they have this joyful sound, and it is just quite a scene. Every district has a different cloth, and the ladies make their dresses out of these cloths, and they dance out in this thing, and it's just quite a scene. And there were probably the bishop's wife, who's a delightful person. It's Mary Lou Reese, and she estimated 8,000, and we thought that was one of those ministerial estimates. 4,000 or 5,000 at least of people that were there, and the men came in, and they had choirs. Had a men's choir that I've got a great video of, it's just it was a great day for that day. And then Sunday, we had some of the same group and more that came in to honor John Wesley in his retirement, and we were able to give him some gifts and things like that from North Alabama and North Georgia, and I got to say a prayer, and there was preaching, other things that happened, and those were great days there in Jalingo, where there's a great big compound with the Methodist Hospital and an orphanage and other things that are part of the Methodist mission there that's been going on since 1923 that we inherited from the Methodist Episcopal Church and then the Methodist Church, and then it was United Methodist, and much of it had been built before the United Methodist got started. It's a historic situation there. So it's great, and a big town there in Jalingo, and our facilities were nice that we were staying in. I mean, not like here, but they were. It was good. It was a good time. Great time right in there.
Fantastic. One of the things, and I was fortunate enough. I got to hear Bishop Alta when he was here back a couple months ago. When he came up to Friendship Church, and one of the things, if I remember correctly, he was talking about going from village to village and the differences across language and even different cultures just from one village to the next. And I wonder how much of a problem does that present as far as spreading the gospel there in Nigeria?
Well, you might have a tribe that doesn't want a bishop to be elected, and they will leave as a tribe, and that's happened several times. Bishop John Wesley Yohana was from a small tribe in the village of Munga, and some of the southern people didn't want to have a bishop from that tribe, so it's very tribal in that area, and that does cause a lot of problems. It's very interesting. They learn their tribal language, they say, from their mother. Then they learn Hausa. The larger tribe speaks Hausa, and that's millions of people across 4 different parts of countries. You understand what I'm saying? And so there are 3 tribes in Nigeria, and Hausa is a northern tribe, but it goes up into Niger and Chad and so forth. And so they learn that from their father, but then they learn English just from other people and from school. So many of the people speak English, and especially people that are dealing with us, they speak it better than I do, and they have a British accent, and it's very nice hearing it. And so that, but yeah, it is still very tribal within the villages, but everybody's a member of the Hausa tribe, so they do have one common language of Hausa, and then most of them, I would say, speak English. And it's very interesting. It's hard for us to understand the African accent in English sometimes till our ear gets used to it. But
Sure.
it's hard for them to understand my southern accent in English. And I was asked to go back and speak at the first graduation ceremony of the Ethel Johnson Comprehensive Secondary School. And I got up and started speaking, and they stopped me. There was some murmuring, and they stopped me and said, "We're going to have to interpret you." And I was afraid they were going to interpret me into pure English, the African side English accent. And that would have been humiliating if I was going to say something. Then they said, "And Robert said," and they would say it in their English, but they interpret it into Hausa. So that's the kind of thing that goes on. But in the annual conference sessions, almost everyone in the annual conference session apparently spoke English, and we didn't have to be interpreted. But they did interpret my graduation speech into Hausa, and that was a very interesting thing. It's an interesting thing how, and another thing, you might be interested in this. They will take you to go and see the chief of each tribe. And this is an important thing in their culture. They have the governmental structure, and then they have the traditional tribal structure underneath that, and it is described who has what jobs. And so it's like a local government and a state and national government, and the local government goes back to their tribal customs and their chief selection and so forth. And so we always go to the chief and say hello to him, give him an Auburn hat or something like that, or a University of Georgia hat or whatever. And so that's a very interesting experience. And we went to the chief in the north, this is illustrative of your question, or answers your question. And Bishop Jones was there, and he honored Bishop Jones by allowing him to sit on the same level that he did. The rest of everybody else is supposed to sit at a lower level from the chief. I've got a humorous story about it, the chief giving me something the first time I went there. Sometime I'll tell you. But he gave Bishop Jones a title called Birkum Surkawi, and he is now the Birkum Surkawi of that tribe, which is a large tribe in the north. And what that did was very important, because that means that the chief is recognizing the Global Methodist Church as the true Methodist Church in that whole northern area.
Oh, wow.
And so that's the kind of thing that goes on. You're in a culture that we don't quite understand, and I don't even know if Bishop Jones understood the importance of that when he said he was going to give him a title, and he gave him a robe and a certificate and so forth. And that was an extremely important thing in their culture, of him recognizing the Global Methodist Church.
That's awesome. Well, you had mentioned as part of this most recent trip that you got to go and revisit the school that the Methodist Church started, and I wonder if you could tell us a little bit more about that.
So we went there, and they had over 200 students. They dress up in uniforms that are prescribed for the Nigerian students, and they dress up in lines, and they're just so intense and happy, and just what they tell us is that many of these, like sixth graders that were in there, it was 6th to 12th grade in the British system, and that's basically what it is, had never seen a white person before. And you saw that in the eyes of some of the little toddlers and things like that. Is like, who in the world is this person, you know? And so we had a very good experience there, and I got to speak to the students. They honor me as a benefactor and so forth, and I tell them that we're in partnership, you know. But they're very appreciative of what was done here in North Alabama among the first partnership that was there. And but the facilities are in bad shape, and this is one of the weaknesses that we find in Nigeria and all over Africa, I think, is that they'll start new things before they maintain what they've got. And so the roofs leak. The computer lab that they have is out of date. It's got tabletop computers that were used in 2015 or 16 or whenever they bought them. And they had a windstorm back in 2018. They had to replace some of the roofs, and they replaced them with the shiny tin rather than the brown tin that had made everything look so nice and new when it was new. Some of the buildings have just become dilapidated and have fallen down, but the others are standing and doing very well. And they never did. They had one. This is just, I'm telling you what the needs are. They need a generator replaced that pumps water from their well. They need some lighting for at night, like solar lighting, because they're afraid of the Fulanis that attack the villages sometimes, and the Fulanis sometimes will graze their cows near the school there, and they'd really rather have some light all night long there for the girls and boys dorm. But the students were just so happy, and the faculty was there and introduced themselves. They were so bright and so articulate in what they were saying. It was just a great experience. And then you look and you say, "Gosh, I wish I wish it was better maintained." And they need a renovation, and they need a new generator. And they have several needs there at the school, but it's still functioning and apparently growing. Because the last time I'd heard it, and they've had these troubles, like the windstorm occurred, and then COVID hit, and they had to close down for that, and then they had riots when I was talking about the violence that had occurred between two rival villages, that was there in Kareem, and they had to shut the school there while those riots were going on. So they've had some ups and downs, but they are apparently on a real upswing on the number of students, and they need a lot of maintenance there. So that's the story of that. It's good. It was good experience.
Good deal. I wonder, excuse me, I wonder, Robert, if you had the ability to talk to every Methodist in North Alabama, what do we need to know about Nigeria that we don't know?
The Nigerians are trying to get free from the United Methodist Church, which constrained them in ministries in a lot of different ways. And it's very difficult in in the north. It's a majority Muslim area. In the Central Conference and South, it's probably 50-50. But to be connected to a church that is as liberal and as the United Methodist Church is becoming, in several different ways, not just the homosexual issue, but in their prescription for what's going to go on with the societies, liberation theology, and all the other things. It's difficult for them to minister in their areas, and they're very biblically centered people, and so for them to grow and thrive there, they have to be they really needed to be independent. And I respect John Wesley Yohana for leading them out, because it caused them to lose some money from his salary. For example, the bishops are very wealthy over there. They just get paid in American dollars. They start out being wealthy. And also the support that the United Methodist Church was giving in several different areas, they walked away from that because of their conscience and their beliefs. So I admire that very much, and I hope that we can be a good partner to them so that they can continue the good ministry that they've been doing and continue to reach people for Christ. This is where the church is growing. This is a growing edge of Christendom right in there, because the other people, both the pagans and the Muslims, they see a grace there. And of course, they don't see it in the violence, but that's so much a part of their culture that's not going to be disqualifying to them. But they see the proclamation of grace and forgiveness, and it's something that they don't know from other philosophies, and they're very much drawn to that. And when the church gets at peace, they'll see the love again of the people. And so that's did that answer your question?
I think it did. Yes, sir. Thank you. Well, you have teased us a couple of times about this gift that you received from the chief. I'd love to hear about that.
Well, first time I went to see the chief of the Carimondi, I had told him that I was a hunter and fisherman and all this, and they had told the chief, and he said, "Well, our people, I hear that you're a hunter." So I was ushered into the chief, and it was very impressive. He was up on kind of a raised platform, and all the people were sitting down below him, and he was a very impressive person. And he said he understood that I was a hunter, but his people were hunters too, and they had captured an African goose. They had captured something they wanted to give me, and they had this big red-headed goose with spurs on its wings, and he presented me with this goose. And, and he said, "We want you to take this back to the United States with you." And I pictured me going through 2 airports in Nigeria and then going through customs in Atlanta with a goose. And I just couldn't figure it in my mind. They have pictures of me with my mouth open. I didn't know what to say. But I was very impressed, with this gift that they had given me. And I said, "What is the name of this goose?" And nobody said anything. I heard somebody hum. Somebody said, like this. And I said, "What is the name of what do you call this goose?" And 2 or 3 of them said, that was the name of the goose. And it was the noise that this goose makes out in the wild, it doesn't honk, it goes mmm like that.
Oh,
And they
okay.
call it the mmm. So I took the goose with me and we went back up north to Perro to the guest house. And of course, we couldn't take it on the airplane with us, so we left it there. And I heard the DS came by and cooked my goose and ate it. So that was the first time a DS has ever cooked my goose, literally in that way. And then I got back to Atlanta and I was filling out my card for entry, Visa card and everything. And they said, "Have you been in a rural area?" "Yes." "Have you handled livestock?" And so I had to check yes. And I had to go back around by agricultural screening. And they said, where have you been? I said, "In northeastern Nigeria." And the guy just rolled his eyes like, "Oh, my Lord, I don't know. Why did I have to get this guy?" And he said, "Well, where were you?" And I said, "Well, in the Benue River Valley." And he was typing on his computer. And he said, "Well, what livestock did you handle?" I said, "I handled a goose." And he said, he actually walked away from his computer terminal like, "Oh, Lord, what am I going to do with this?" And then he came back and he said, "Well, what was the name of the goose?" And I said, "Mmm." And he said, "What was the name of the goose?" I said, "Mmm, that's all I know." And he said, "Just go on. Just go on through the line." And so that's the story.
Oh, wow.
That's
That's
a
a
pretty
great
good story, though, isn't it?
It really is. Wow. Oh, wow. Yeah, I know you wanted to be respectful of the chief, but what do you do with a goose?
You give it to your DS, and maybe he gives you a good appointment the next time.
There
I
you
guess.
go. Well, Robert, we're kind of running up on the end of our time, but I wonder if there's anything else about your most recent trip or just in general that you'd like to share with us about Nigeria today.
The Nigerians have had a tough time, and they've been attacked by the Boko Haram, by the Fulani, and now by the United Methodists. And you need to speak truth. When it's truth, it's just truth. You can't get around it. And they need us to be good partners where we don't dictate what they need, but we get alongside them and help them with their legal fees, for example, because one of the tricks the United Methodists have done is they will start trouble in a church and there's violence there, so the government will shut the church down. They can shut churches down if there's a riot or something, and then they sue and try to get control of the church, even though that church had voted to be Global Methodist. And so they have to find some money to defend themselves in court. And there's a good bit of money coming in on the side of the United Methodists to try to win those cases and try to reclaim some of the churches that have become Global Methodist. And they've won every case that they've gotten in court. But we need to be good partners with them to help them in their struggles and in their persecution, to pray for them. And I'd love for a few people to be able to go over there and visit and know firsthand the joy and the faithfulness of the Nigerian Global Methodists. It's a treat. It's a treat to go over there and see it. So that's what I'd like to say about that.
Yeah, that's great. That is great. Yes, to hear about the joy, to hear about the expansion of Christianity, of people coming to faith, even in the midst of persecution. Wow, what a powerful word. Well, Robert, I like to end these interviews with a different kind of question, and so I'll put it to you, and this will kind of wrap us up for the day. Do you have a favorite hymn or worship song, or is there one that is speaking to you particularly in this season of life?
Joyful, joyful, we adore thee.
That's a great one.
And there's a lot of joy in the Nigerian church. That's one of the main things in living in a less developed area, very undeveloped area, some places, and not having as easy a life as we have here. They seem to have more joy than we do, more of that Christian joy, of that fruit of the Spirit. So, joyful, joyful, we adore thee, God of glory, Lord of love.
Amen. Amen. And that is another lesson we can take away, is true joy doesn't come from things. It doesn't come from wealth. So that's
You're absolutely right.
Great. Yeah, very good. Well, friends, that is just about going to do it for today's episode of the Heart and Life podcast. What a really deep and informative conversation. I know I learned a tremendous amount that I didn't already know about Nigeria, and I'm so thankful that we are partnering, that North Alabama is partnering along with North Georgia with our brothers and sisters there in Nigeria. I want to thank the Reverend Robert Sparkman for taking time to be with us today. Really appreciate his insight and wisdom, his years of ministry, and just the just all that he brings to this conversation. All right, friends, as we wrap up, I'd like to offer this brief word of encouragement. God is on the move. God is up to something big. We often reduce what God is doing to our own individual contexts. But the truth is, God is stirring up hearts all around the globe, as we heard today about what God is doing in Nigeria. May we continue to pray for and celebrate all that God is doing here in North Alabama and in North Georgia and in Nigeria and, of course, all around the world. Well, thanks again for joining us today on the Heart and Life podcast, and God bless. Well, that's about all the time we have today on the Heart and Life podcast. We hope you've enjoyed our conversation, but even more, we hope that something in it brought you hope, inspiration, or maybe taught you something new. If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, follow, subscribe, and share our podcast on your podcast platform of choice. Music for today's episode is Genoa by 50 Sounds.